Welcome to the Westminster Record. I'm Simeon Elderfield. In this edition, we'll be talking all things synod and how parish and the diocese have been impacted by Pope Francis's recent call and invitation to meet, listen and discern. The Church is on a journey, a synodal pathway of mutual listening and discernment. The diocesan phase of this journey launched at the end of 2021 and has involved parishes meeting, sharing and listening in an effort to discern the movement of the Holy Spirit. Now, this has meant a lot of practical effort on the part of parish clergy and volunteers, some of which has required some very serious effort to organise in the middle of a busy time of the year. Here, 2 parish synod volunteers share their experience of leading this pathway in St William of York in Stanmore, giving an honest look at both the frustrations and the surprises they encountered along the way.
So I'm Juliet. So I've been at St William of York now for a few years. I'm married with 2 children and I work full time.
I'm Maureen. I've been attending William of York for the last probably about 6 years, and I'm widowed and retired. A retired head teacher.
So the synod, which was announced by Pope Francis last year, and then has trickled down to the parish level, and you've kind of been given the instructions that we need to start listening to everybody. What was your first reactions when you heard about it?
Great. To start listening.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and giving people an opportunity.
I think for me, I just found it was nice. It was reassuring now that the Pope doesn't want to just hear from the bishops. He now wants to hear from his own people. So people from the ground level, he wants to hear up.
What has the synodal process looked like practically for Stanmore Parish?
I think it was very rushed. I think from Danielle's and my point of view, who we were actually asked by Father Michael if we could actually organise it, and I think we were like, how are we going to do it in sort short space of time? COVID was going on at the moment, so people were reluctant to come out.
Exactly. I mean, I would agree with that. For me, it was the timing.
Yeah.
And it was rushed because I'm sure that if we'd had more time to plan and perhaps speak more informally to other people, it might have been a better process.
Yeah.
Because as it was, we made announcements that there were going to be 2 meetings after the 5:30 Mass on a Saturday, after the 10 o'clock Mass the following Sunday, or 2 weeks later.
2 weeks.
And that was all we managed in that time span. And I'm sure if we'd had longer, we would have had far more productive meetings. I mean, the worst possible time of year, the run up to Christmas as well.
So lots of things happening.
Lots of things, yes.
Yeah.
Practically, we've got the 2 meetings, but I guess from it sounds like is that there was actually a desire to do it properly.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Oh yes.
Definitely.
Yes.
So there's the values being seen in the actual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had
idea of
that
it.
commitment. We just didn't know how we were going to do it in the timescale, and that deadline of December was the real fly in the ointment. You know, we said this
because I thought it was a fantastic project, and I thought it's a brilliant project that's been now given out to the community for them to get involved into it. But some of the questions I found were not really directed completely at the community on family life and things like that. So I found people were finding it hard. I think you found that in your group
we found
as
that
well.
in ours. In fact, it was hard to keep to the actual questions. People wanted to talk about the wider church.
Yes.
They weren't talking about the community here in Stanmore as such. There were some, but most of it was the wider church. And the same issues came up. What was coming out was that the church feels more exclusive than inclusive. And I was quite surprised at the number of people who felt very strongly about a male-dominated church and the position of women. That came up in But I don't think it came up in your group. So
but it sort of came up in because one of the people that were coming along to the first meeting wanted to know, are we going to talk about women priests? Why aren't you going to talk about women priests? And I said the questions will be asked, but you can bring it along, you can bring that into the meeting and point your views. Yes, but if I talk about it, what's going to happen? Is the church really going to do something about it? Now, this is a Catholic person that actually does come regular to the church as well. So that's why a few people actually said to me, what will happen at the end of this? I explained it and everything like that. But you could feel that they were thinking, here we go again. No.
The group that I was in was not so much women priests, but women in leadership roles.
Yes.
That they felt that women weren't valued within the church. And there was a lot of concern. I don't know if there were a number of parents in that group, but a lot of concern about the youth being missing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the timings, it wasn't something that occurred to me, but I would say very often the timing of services is not conducive to young people who, if they're out on a Saturday night, are not going to be getting up for 10 o'clock mass. That was, and it was also the archaic language, which was, and I was quite surprised when somebody talked about not many people really understand the structure of the mass, and it becomes automatic. And we're almost asking for, I didn't quite know what they were asking for, some sort of
yes, I think
training, explanation.
Some sort of wanted to go back to the Latin way.
Yeah.
They wanted to go back to the old-fashioned way that you kneeled at certain points in the time of the Mass. You made sure that when you were coming to communion, you genuflected at the altar before the tabernacle before you took your communion. They wanted to go back the old way. So, because in my group, they were actually saying that some of the children in the church or parents, they don't know how to control their kids because the kids are not coming to church. And that's how they bring up the kids. They should be more strict with the kids and things like that. So they wanted to go back that way and say, it needs to be done. But at the same time, they were also asking within the same group, why aren't the youth coming to the church? And for me personally, I found it very difficult to keep quiet. And I also found that people were turning to me. I don't know if they did that to you, Maureen, when they've asked a question, they sort of look at you like, what's the answer? What's the solution? What do you think? So even they were saying something about the church, and then they were, as if I was on the side of the church, I'm representing the church. I found that a bit strange as well. And I said, at one point I said, I'm just I'm volunteering. I'm just taking the notes. That's all I'm doing. I'm not here to comment.
No, I didn't find that in my second group. The first group, the first group was far more reticent, and in fact I was with Daniela, and she was the one leading it, so I felt I could participate in that one. But for the second one, when I was leading the group, they just wanted to talk, and we had a whole cross-section of people in that group, which was, and nobody was wanting to go back. They all wanted to go forward. They wanted far more modern language, the language of the prayers, which again they felt was, the male domination kept coming in, the missing youth, the missing LGBT community, or not missing LGBT community, but the fact that they were possibly not welcomed, and there was this whole thing about the church feeling. It's not something I've ever heard before, that it was exclusive.
I find it so interesting hearing that, because I mean I've heard a lot of different things now coming back from the synod, and it seems like the two things that get wrapped up are obviously welcome, but then also formation and teaching and learning. And do you think that's accurate in terms of analysis of what you were hearing?
Yes, I think so.
Yes. There were people in my group who'd obviously had experience of attending services with other denominations, and they often felt that other church or other denominations were more welcoming.
One of the things that did come out a lot was during the COVID period time, some people felt very isolated from the church, from the parish. They were felt that, they weren't included in things. People were not checking up on them to see how they were and all that.
Would you say that this has been useful in resetting that balance? That people now do feel like they're able to come in because the synod has created those sorts of spaces?
I think when I spoke to people and I said, this during the COVID, we did actually have volunteers. I was one of the volunteers as well that would ring people up and check whether they're okay and have conversations on the phone. So I think they felt, oh, I didn't know that. But it was just the way of trying to communicate to everybody outside, and not everybody was actually streamlining our masses. They would go to different churches, or they would go to different countries to hear the mass. And I think from our side, we need, probably St William of New York needs to look at having a better communication online with its own parishioners and things like that as well.
So any expectations, Maureen, that you have?
No, well, I mean, I wasn't going in with expectations because I wasn't part, I came in as a later volunteer and I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. I was pleased when people did stay and we did have the groups and we did have conversations, and I felt this very, very common feeling about wanting to go out into the community. And in fact, somebody had actually said we need to go back to like the early church, where people went out into the community, where there was mutual care and where needs were understood. And they felt we've moved away from that.
So it did actually focus minds and encourage people to imagine what they could do.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah, definitely. And also it gave an insight to people of some of the things that is actually going on within the church. What we at St William of York have been trying to do and organise. So some people who came along to the meetings before the COVID, we had a very social. We have a very social, active church hall committee. So there's always functions on and things like that going on. Some of the people that attended some of these synod meetings, unfortunately, don't actually attend some of the social evenings to actually see that we try and engage. We have been like that. We've got a lovely, beautiful African community as well in our church. So we just before COVID we did that.
We did an African
did an African evening, which was really, really nice to bring people all together. So we try and engage people in the church as well. But it all boils down to volunteers.
Yeah.
And it's how we can get volunteers as well.
Somebody also mentioned this was a young man who just started attending the church. I think it was actually his first time coming to the parish.
Yeah.
And he stayed on. And he said that maybe we should be finding ways to develop self-esteem and things like public speaking. I mean, I don't know who would do all this. It seemed a great idea. But he said using talents within the parish, to provide mentoring. He talked about budgeting. He was thinking of the needs of young people and the issues for young people, and maybe trying to address some of those needs. But that's something vast to tackle. But then you can't write it off, because the young people are the church of the future, and that came up that kept coming up.
Do you think perhaps it's less a question of just simply putting on an extra mass, but actually it's about changing the culture?
Had we not got COVID going on, we actually were running groups for young people. What we came out from the group is that a lot of parents, before the COVID as well, they would come to the church, get their children confirmation, and then you wouldn't see them again.
Yeah.
So some people within the group actually did say we should actually say, there should be something that the church says that, okay, if you're going to get your child have communion or confirmation, then you have to stay within the church. You have to be commit and stay in the church within this particular parish, whatever, for a few years, because at the end of the day, we're not seeing those kids afterwards. Do they know why we're having to kneel down at certain points, or why we say a certain prayer? And that's what came out in my group. That needs to be explained a little bit more. But how do we do that?
I think I said earlier that people say going to Mass just becomes something automatic, and people aren't really thinking about what's happening and their involvement and their role.
People were talking about maybe we need some deacons, some extra deacons. We've only got one parish priest, we did, but we haven't got anybody else that can help him. So, apart from the volunteers, so maybe we need deacons. How do we engage in getting deacons or youth workers involved a bit more? But it's through the same volunteers. We're having the same people volunteer to do things, same people to volunteer to do the cleaning as well in the church, and same people volunteering for the social committees and all that. And it's how can the church encourage other people to come forward?
And I do think this was a listening exercise for the people, not the hierarchy.
Yes.
And that was raised.
That was raised, and people felt very strongly about that. And we did when we were planning. We could do so much better if we had more time.
It's interesting hearing the responses again, because it sounds like a group of the people you listened to were very engaged. They were very interested in having their voices heard, and they were grateful to be listened to.
Yes.
Yeah.
But concerned about what was going to happen to what they were saying. Or were they just saying it and that was it? It goes into a vacuum. Or was it going to change anything within the church?
Just for St William of York, do you feel like it was a useful thing to do?
I think it was useful just to hear what people have to say. For me, I was quite surprised with some of the things that people actually said and came out with. But also at the same time, I just felt it wasn't the right decision by the church to do it at that particular time because of COVID, and you're not really giving us enough time to reach out to the people that the church is trying to draw in, and that is actually the youth and the people who have left the church and who now don't believe in God anymore, or they've gone into other religions. Yeah, I think at one point we had quite a lot of young youths in our group around the same age, and a lot of the parents had formed groups together. So, those kids tended to come to Mass together because they knew their friends were going to be there and things like that. But yeah, I think it's all down to volunteers, and I think that's the problem that we particularly have in our parish is we tend to use, like Maureen said earlier on, we seem to see the same, not use, but the same volunteers coming forward to help out or being asked to help out because there's just nobody else available.
When you look around at St William of York, or even in the wider church and the wider community, what gives you hope?
Well, now the church is open, I just love to go in and just sit down and listen to the peace of the church and look at the walls, because I think, I can get something on there, and I've heard people saying just sometimes when they've had a really bad day at work and just come into the church and just sit there and listen to the masses, or just listen to the peace and quiet. I think that's what I love about the church.
Unfortunately, our church isn't always open during the day.
No,
but,
because
another church I sometimes go to is open all day, and it was interesting. A parishioner who was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and she came to tell me, she said the first place she headed for was the church, because she knew the church was going to be open, and she just wanted to go in and sit quietly. And I remember when my husband was diagnosed, again with a terminal illness, I just ran from the doctor's surgery into the church. So it is something, it's a haven. In spite of all the things we're saying, it is the place that we head to. But that was the empty church. That was just with the tabernacle and and the presence of Jesus within the church. It wasn't necessarily a human who was providing that comfort.
Well, thank you for letting us into the discussions that you had and into the experiences that you've had at St William of York. I think however bad it gets, sometimes it can actually be quite restorative to hear it, because actually you're reminded that these things matter to people so much, precisely for that last point about the fact that the church is always that refuge, and it's always there for people. And I think a lot of these things often come from that desire to see it be the best it can be, and to serve people in the best way it can be. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you
very much. Thanks.
After meeting with Juliet and Maureen, I spoke with Father Chris Vipers, Director of the Agency for Evangelisation, parish priest and principal coordinator of the Diocesan Synodal Pathway, to speak about their experience and get his perspective on the broader pathway and its eventual goals.
I'm so grateful to Stanmore Parish for doing what they could, and that's something that Cardinal Vincent asked every parish to do. Just do what you can, and do what you can within the time constraints given. In a sense, we're not our own masters with the timetable. Pope Francis declared the synod way back that this was going to happen, but we didn't quite know how he wanted it to happen until fairly late in the day. What we've not had is the luxury of a long timetable to do it here in Westminster, but what we have had is a period of really kind of intensive listening. And a lot of parishes and a lot of schools that have been part of this. One of our prisons here in the diocese, the Cardinal himself visited one of our prisons in London and met with the prisoners there. What we've had is a really intensive period of listening. It's like, during this few weeks of our synodal pathway so far, everyone's been listening. Now, the challenge to our churches and our parishes and our schools has just been to, so make this a priority for the next few weeks. Make these synodal conversations, listening events, meetings, make that a priority. And a lot of parishes, funnily, have thanked me that actually we didn't give them too long, because they said if you'd given us too long, we'd have forgotten about it, or we'd have pushed it down the line, or something else would have come up, or Lent would have happened, or so this has been quite an intensive period, and I think it's been really good because it's really focused our minds over these weeks.
And I guess we can get kind of caught up in, what if I'm not heard particularly, or get the bishops and the priests to do things and change things. But I guess, what's the wider context of the synod?
I think the big question for all of us is, are we listening to the Holy Spirit? I think that's the fundamental question. And are we listening to each other, and are we listening to the voice of the Holy Spirit in each other? Do we really see ourselves as on that journey? I mean, one of the decisions we made very early on in our planning for the diocese here was that we wouldn't just have a questionnaire to fill in, like an online questionnaire or a physical printed questionnaire. We did have a document called Share Your Thoughts, which was an opportunity for those who couldn't attend any of the area listening events. All our auxiliary bishops in the diocese hosted listening events around the diocese in Hertfordshire, in West London, in East London, in Central London, in North London. We've had lots of online events, listening events. There have been loads of events for people on a diocesan-wide scale to participate in, as well as all the parish events that have happened and parish listening. We've had all of those things happening, and people have had plenty of opportunity to express their thoughts, their dreams, their vision, their hope, their frustrations, their struggles, about their faith and the faith of the church. The Share Your Thoughts document that went out was a chance for people to, if they didn't get a chance to go anywhere else, or even if they did, just to share what was on their heart. And the task now for the diocese here, and I'm part of a team that's receiving all these submissions from individuals and from parishes and from schools and communities, and boy, are we doing a lot of reading, and we're trying to read in a really respectful and very humble and very prayerful way, and not to lose anything of what people are saying. so that, please God, when we come to send the report from the diocese to the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales, that will then go as part of a national report to the European Bishops' Conference, that will then go as part of a European Bishops' Conference to the Vatican for the Synod in 2023, that when we submit the diocesan report, and when that's echoed back to the diocese, people will recognise their voice. If we end up with a document that bears no relation to anything that people have said, then, we kind of haven't done our job, and you can sack me. Please do.
So that's where the church is going from here. But the individual people in the parishes, how would you encourage them to continue that journey?
You can't start a journey and then suddenly stop it. Yeah. And when you've only just started walking, actually, and we've only just started walking on this, learning how to journey together, learning how to listen to each other in a really deep and respectful way, learning that we can learn from each other. I think in time this will affect our whole culture of how we are as church and how we are as a diocese. And on a local scale, which is where all of us encounter things and things make the most sense, on a local scale, it can transform the way parishes are. I mean, I shared at the start that I'm parish priest of 2 churches, and in both churches our synodal pathway has been really, really life-giving. It's involved and included voices who otherwise just hadn't been heard before. We didn't have the opportunity to meet in that way, to share about these things, about our faith and the faith of the church, and to reflect on the pandemic together, and just how that challenged us and how the church was there for us or not, and then wider questions about our dreams for the kind of church that God wants us to be. We've not had the chance to meet together and share in that way, and everyone from the 2 churches who's been involved in it, I say it's been really, the participation has been really quite humbling to see, actually. All ages, all ethnicities, people just feeling that they have a voice, that their voice is respected, that their voice is valued. They want to continue doing this. Yeah. And I find that quite exciting, so rather than just on a Sunday, people sitting in a pew just saying, yes, Father, yes, Father, yes, Father, yes, Father, and me just, standing up there saying, come on, just come alive, parish, come alive, let's talk, let's be. I think people really want it. Mm. And I think something of what we started to do in this synod and in the synodal pathway, I think is going to transform the way we are as churches, as parishes, and as dioceses, and as the wider church as the years go on. I think that's what the Pope wants, and that's what our pioneering and daring Pope has sort of invited us to do and to be. God has more to show us. He's got new horizons to open up for us as well. The gospel of Jesus Christ is ever old and ever new. And so I'm excited about where this is going to lead us in our life as a church. The Pope said very early on, this synod isn't about changing doctrines or church discipline. He said that early on. He said it's actually about becoming more authentically a Christian community that walks together, that listens to one another, and that is, through doing that, fired up to evangelise the modern world, the world in which we live today. Cardinal Vincent uses the expression, that this synod can strengthen our hands for our common mission. And I love that, and just, the possibilities that suggests as we go forward,
I often end by asking people what they see as being their shining light of hope in these sorts of situations. But I guess you've almost answered that one. Yeah. It just is kind of bringing up people that's so hopeful about it.
I think so, and I think a lot of people have asked me, because I've been to all the listening events in all the areas and all the online listening events. We've had lots of listening events in my own parish, and people have asked me over and over again, but where is this leading? You're on a pathway, but where's the pathway taking you? The answer is, I don't know. Because when you're blown along by the Holy Spirit of God, he will take you where he needs you to be, according to the will of God. And in a sense, what's the purpose of this synod? Well, the purpose is the process. It's actually discovering ourselves as people on a journey. Do you know, when did the Second Vatican Council end? Do you think how many years ago? I mean, I think
60 years this year.
Well, I think 60 years. So I mean, it was almost as I'm almost as old as the Second Vatican Council. Not quite, but the Second Vatican Council had this beautiful image of the pilgrim people of God, and I think certainly in my lifetime. And in my active ministry, I'm 25 years a priest this year. This is the first time I've really experienced how that feels and what that looks like. Of being part of a pilgrim people, listening, journeying, respecting, valuing, loving, and together seeking the will of God.
That's it for this edition of the Westminster Record. If you want to find out more about what you've heard, follow the Diocese of Westminster on social media or visit our website. I hope you can continue to join us. Thank you for listening and goodbye.